National Veterans Memorial and Museum began with a vision from the late Senator John Glenn, who understood the value of telling and sharing the story of our veterans. From the initial view, the architecture impresses upon visitors the importance of what lies within. Seeming to rise organically from the earth, the building itself is a symbol of our nation's veterans and their resilient spirit and unending commitment to making this country stronger. Once inside the museum, visitors embark on a narrative journey, following exhibitions that focus on the servicemen and women and their families. Individual stories and shared experiences are illustrated through personal artifacts, quotes, letters, photographs, and powerful films of veterans telling their unique story in their own words. The National Veterans Memorial and Museum. It's more than a museum. It's the new home of the brave. Plan your visit today.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome and thank you for joining our latest Veteran Voices program at the National Veterans Memorial and Museum. My name is Colonel Retired Bill Butler, Chief of Staff. On behalf of our President and CEO, Lieutenant General Retired Mike Farrader, welcome as we learn about the United States Beirut Intervention mission from 1982 to 1984 and the 265 U.S. servicemen, 89 French soldiers, and 2 Italian soldiers who served and sacrificed in the name of freedom. The bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut was the single largest loss of life in U.S. Marine Corps history since Iwo Jima. Joining us today to describe this is Major General Jim Lariviere, U.S. Marine Corps retired, a participant in the Beirut Intervention mission. And now to our President and CEO, Lieutenant General Mike Farrader, and Major General Jim Lariviere, our presenter.
Thank you, Bill, and welcome everybody. It's a great day to be a veteran, and especially great to be one today here at the National Veterans Memorial Museum, and to be here today with my friend, my Citadel classmate, and a true warrior, Jim Lariviere. Jim, welcome. It's great to see you and to be with you again.
Mike, it's great to be with you.
You know, folks, I just want everyone to know that at the National Veterans Memorial Museum, our message to you today is we are open, we are strong, we are connecting, and we're impacting lives. And we were able to do that even during COVID. We shifted our fighting stance from physical events where normally Jim and I would be sitting on a panel next to each other to these online, digital, and virtual activities, to a number of 42,000 social media impressions and outreach per week. Fantastic job by our team at the NVMM, and fantastic following across America, coast to coast and north to south. Now, Veteran Voices is really designed to bring inspirational leaders to all of you out there, and then to connect you with them, with their lessons learned or their thoughts on leadership, and then finally to have a favorable and positive impact in your life. So let's get started. So Jim, you and I go way back to, let's talk a little bit about our days at the Citadel in Charleston, and then how that led you to be a young Marine officer.
Well, Mike, first off, it's great to be with you, and thanks for all that you do for America's veterans out there at the National Museum. Really appreciate it. In a previous life, I had the privilege to be the staff director of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and so I know how important it is that we remember what veterans do and what the debt of gratitude that we owe them for our freedoms. So thank to you and your team for all of this, and thanks for the opportunity to commemorate the loss of life for those brave Marines and Allied soldiers that died during the Beirut bombing. But yeah, we go back quite a ways, probably longer than we care to admit at this point. Back with a lot of our classmates from all the services, people who graduated into all the services from the class of '79. In some ways, I was reminded the other day, in some ways you were my old boss, because we were on the summer all guards together, and you were the first sergeant, so we had to we used to paying attention to what you had to say back then.
Well, great. And then, so Jim, gosh, we graduated in '79, and before you knew it, all those things that we dream of as young lieutenants in the basic course, and will I be ready when I'm called? And this is as true today. I know your two daughters are serving our country, as are my two sons and my daughter Mary Whitney as well. And we've seen that in their eyes, that that question, will I measure up? And so there you find yourself in a battalion landing team. And give us this run up personally, and then talk about sort of the context of the mission.
Yeah, so similar to like a lot of brand new lieutenants, end up being in a deployable unit on your first assignment. And I was fortunate enough to be assigned, get an assignment to 2nd Recon Battalion at Onslow Beach back in 1981. Had an opportunity. I'd already been to jump school, go to Ranger School, go to the Amphib Recon School, and found myself assigned to a platoon that was going to get ready to do a Marine, what was then called a Marine amphibious unit deployment to the Mediterranean. It's the summer of 1982, and this is in the days before all the media and the instant information that you get. So you caught the evening news, or you got your local newspaper, and found, we were watching the developments in Lebanon during that summer, but quite frankly, not paying a great deal of attention to it. I guess that's one of the lessons here, is that when you're a young officer and you're in a job like these, you have to be ready for those things that you don't necessarily see coming. The Lebanon, the background, just to do the short version of how the Lebanon crisis unfolded, goes back, all the way to the founding of Lebanon back in the 40s. And that map there kind of shows you the religious distribution of the country, largely divided between Maronite Christians, Shia Muslims, Sunni Muslims, and a mystical sect called the Druze. The Constitution from 1942 assigned key positions in the government to those religious groups based on a 1932 census. And so the two most important, the president and the chief of staff of the army, go to the Maronite Christians. This has proven to be a very unstable and contentious way to govern, and it has been all the way through. And so by the end of the U.S. intervened in 1958 in Lebanon, and by the late 1960s, early 1970s, the unrest is continuing. It's exacerbated by the fact that the Lebanese government in 1969 concluded a thing called the Cairo Agreement that allowed the Palestinian Liberation Organization to operate essentially as a state within a state in southern Lebanon. So not only do you have this mix, this religious mix in the group, you've now got the PLO operating in southern Lebanon doing cross-border attacks in Israel, which is causing problems, obviously, for the Israelis. Tensions explode in '76. There's a Lebanese civil war kicks off. All these different groups end up having militias, the Christian Phalange, the Shia Muslim Amal, and they all end up in an open conflict that ultimately results in a conference in Riyadh, and an agreement to end the civil war, but involves the Syrians to bring in an intervention force into eastern Lebanon. So now you've got a situation where weak central government, armed militias, a weak central army, a Palestinian Liberation Organization operating in southern Lebanon, and causing a great deal of unrest, and which is a situation very similar to what we see today, and what we're used to seeing now in Somalia and Libya and other places. But back then, this was a little bit of a new thing and something that we were not, at least in the Marine Corps at the time, we weren't used to tracking. But I guess the proximate cause that kicks off the Marine intervention, though, is the Israeli invasion of southern Lebanon in June of 1982. If you could, I think there's 2 more slides. Go to the map, if you would, please. So Operation Peace for Galilee kicks off in June of 1982. And originally it was supposed to be a limited objective attack with the goal of just pushing the PLO back away from that southern border that you see down there so that they can't fire rockets into Israel. But they meet with such success that a week later, they've pushed the PLO all the way back up to the Beirut to Damascus highway and over into Beirut, and basically have Yasser Arafat and his crew under siege in West Beirut, which is the Muslim side of Beirut. Beirut being divided into a Christian and a Muslim side, and West Beirut being the Muslim side. This is all happening at the time, on a personal side. This is all happening at the time that my unit, the Battalion Landing Team 18 or 38, and my reconnaissance platoon, we're out doing pre-deployment workups. We are out at 29 Palms. We're training at Camp Lejeune, and we are paying not a great deal of attention to all this because this seems like another Middle East flare-up that isn't going anywhere. Unbeknownst to us, the political military side, or the political side, was hard at work trying to figure out how to solve this. So just a little bit of a political background. The Reagan administration had come in 1980, right on the heels of the Carter administration concluding the Egypt peace deal with Israel. And the Reagan administration was looking to do a similar deal with another country adjacent to Israel, and they had locked on the idea that Lebanon might be that target. And so what begins to develop in the minds of some of the Reagan officials is that we can use this crisis, or we can take advantage of this situation to meet a number of our policy goals. We want to get all the foreign actors, the Syrians, the PLO, and the Israelis out of Lebanon. We want to strengthen the Lebanese government, central Lebanese government. We want to calm down all these militias, and then we want the Lebanese government to conclude a peace deal with Israel. And so thus starts the conversation. If you can go to the next slide with the map, the thing that now begins to develop, you see that green line there was literally called the Green Line. It's a series of streets that run through the center that mark the dividing line between East and West Beirut. Yasser Arafat is jammed up from the airport down at the bottom there. His forces are basically on the west side of that map, all the way up into the port in downtown Beirut. And the Israelis have got him trapped, and everybody's stuck. The Israelis don't want to go into downtown West Beirut because it's going to be a massive casualty-producing event that they're not interested in having. The PLO can't go anywhere because the Maronite Christian forces own East Beirut and have them penned in, and the Maronites don't want to go into West Beirut and kick everybody out either. And so what begins to develop is this idea, Special Envoy Phil Habib and Yasser Arafat start to have a conversation about how can we get the PLO out? And what they come up with is the idea that an international force will land in the port at Beirut, and the international community will facilitate, under the eyes of the Israelis, but under the guard of this international force, a withdrawal of the PLO to 6 different countries scattered across the Mideast and North Africa. And so this is the plan that develops. And how the Marines end up in this is the planners back in Washington decide that the unit that's going to be used is the unit that's already in the Mediterranean, the 22nd Marine Amphibious Unit, wow, to go in and be part of that evacuation force.
So when you arrived, what were your first impressions of what you had just gotten into?
So, well, if I could just do this story real quick. I didn't go in with this group. I was with the second group. And,
Right.
But the 25th, the 22nd Marine Amphibious Group lands the day we left, relieved them in August, 25 August of '82. So we were literally getting on the ship, and we heard our predecessors have just landed in Beirut. And all of a sudden we're thinking, well, what are we headed for? By the time we got across the Med, by the time we did an exercise called Northern Wedding Bold Guard, and then we pulled through the Gibraltar Straits and started heading for Lebanon, our predecessors had evacuated the PLO and had been actually withdrawn back out onto the ship, and the PLO was gone, and everybody thought this was all over. They withdrew on the 10th of September. Back onto the ship. 4 days later, the Lebanese president is assassinated in a massive bombing. And all of a sudden, the conversation back in Washington is we need to reintroduce the Marines. And so by the 29th of September, the Marines are back on the shore. They've been designated to be in the airport. The French are in downtown Beirut, and the Italians are in the middle. And that's what's been called Multinational Force 1. Kicks off. And so by the time my MEU gets there, we relieve 22nd MAU on the 29th of October. And all of a sudden now we are in Beirut, relieving them on the second group. So to answer your question, again, cautionary, kind of an interesting look back historically today. When we send people in to go to places like this, there's pre-deployment training, there's cultural training, there's language training, there's briefings on who all the different players are. I literally got a pallet load of ammo dropped on the flight deck with a set of rules of engagement cards stuck in the banding around it, and said, your landing time is X, and you'll be pulling security at the beach. When I got there, and that's about what we knew about going into the route.
Yeah. So at this point, your senior NCOs probably had time in Vietnam and other things. What did you draw as a young officer from, or how did you pull that team together?
So to be honest with you, so I had a very junior crew, and in fact, I none of my team leaders were Vietnam vets. Neither was my platoon sergeant. Actually, it was a relatively young staff sergeant. I did have an experience enough. I had one experienced team leader who was a former Special Forces who got out and came back in the Marine Corps. So he was an SF guy. I had been to Ranger School, as had my, and I had another team leader that had some experience, a decent amount of experience. But we were a relatively junior crew of young Marines who had spent the summer, trying to do the workups and get the qualifications to do the recon thing. But in all of that, at that time, all of it was focused on ground reconnaissance, foot mobile, or insertion by some sort of fast rope, or I guess it wasn't even fast rope then, helo rappel. Nowhere in this was vehicle patrolling. And we had done exactly zero of that because that was not in the mission set for a standard Marine reconnaissance platoon at the time, which, as the way this developed, turned out exactly what we were going to do: urban mounted patrolling, which we had zero experience with.
I think it often speaks to the adaptive nature of our soldiers and Marines and sailor and airmen. The moments after someone tells you, so that this is the way you're going to now be inserted, or this is the way you're going to operate, there's the first thought of, gosh, we don't know much about that. And then the second thought is, well, let's invent it. We got to get on with the mission anyways. And that's where we see the best of our young men and women underneath us, huh?
So this was learning on the fly, and it was actually, even now when I look back on it, it's still somewhat of a blur because it did happen so quickly. So a couple of things happened, and again, this is kind of an interesting experience for a very young junior officer, that going all the way back to the White House on the decision to intervene. One of the things that was decided by the National Security Council staff, and then ultimately coming down through the Joint Staff, through OSD and the Joint Staff, was this idea that we were going to, we, the Marines, were going to support the central Lebanese government with our presence. And that word had a lot of weight to it for those of us who were in Beirut, because that became the mission. And to this day, a lot of people still debate what that is. But the other thing that came down very specifically was this idea that there was going to be presence patrols in East Beirut in very visible support of the Lebanese government. So this, I literally thought they were kidding at the time when I was told the Joint Staff is directing this operation. And I thought, yeah, right. And subsequently, I've dug up the paperwork that actually shows the X-word that came down from the Joint Staff that says conduct joint patrols. And this filters all the way down, and my battalion turns around to us and goes, "You're it. You're going. Get up here to the headquarters. We need to plan the patrols."
Yeah, just ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Major General Retired Jim Lariviere describe his experiences from Beirut. Jim and his Force Recon platoon entered into the city of Beirut and operated there. And we're discussing his lessons learned. Also would make the point that we're the National Veterans Memorial Museum. And though we have the title of national and it has been signed into law, we receive no federal funds or state funds. And therefore, I invite you to support us with your donations or join as a member and be a part of the storytelling that we're so able to do because of this great platform. So Jim, at this point, I remember that there was no U.S. CENTCOM, and it was actually U.S. Readiness Command out of Tampa, the precursor of a future unified command plan, which is kind of wonky for this discussion. But the point is, you had someone stirring your spoon, your combat tactical spoon, from a location far away in the Pentagon, and this idea in the book First Battles describes how often we put our brave young men and women in there because we are big bad USA, and often the enemy didn't get the word. And so as is the case, has been the case.
Yep.
And then the resilience and training and instincts come into play. So walk us through some of the things you saw and experienced and how they probably shaped you.
So this don't want to sound over dramatic. I mean, this was, for me as a young officer, was a very much a shaping event, and one that I still look back on with great memories, but one that had a huge impact on me, because this did end up coming down from the top. So the idea was that this was going to be, we were going to do these presence patrols. And in the space of about 48 hours, we had to transform ourselves into an urban patrolling unit. We had spent the whole summer doing the jungle sneak through, small boat insertion, ranger schools kind of stuff, ranger kite patrols. I've been to ranger school. I use that syllabus, like that's what we've been doing. And all of a sudden, so now we have this mission. So if we go to I think it's the next slide, next couple of slides. Oh, that was MF1. Go ahead, keep scrolling through. So this is the alert order that told us we were gonna do this. You can see where it says presence. I think go to the photo with the Jeep is probably where we need to get to. So my battalion commander says, "Okay, right, you only have one Jeep assigned to you." We stole 3 tow Jeeps away from the platoon, turned them over to the Mao service support element, and they shopped 4 Jeeps overnight. They put the wire cutters on, they put the gun mounts on, stripped the windshields off, sandbagged the bottom, and it was literally overnight turned a normal Jeep into that. And it looks like Rat Patrol out of the old TV program. And this is what we ended up having to do our patrols. And so I was dragged up to a meeting at the Ministry of Defense with my battalion commander. We met with the Italian and the French. We divided up the city. We did our patrol routes, and I was off to the races to go do a patrol. And so and this was back in the day when there was no GPS. And so I ended up having So I ended up doing, this is like right out of a bad movie. I'm operating with 3 different maps. I've got a 1 to 50,000 that's way too small and doesn't have street names on it. I've got a 1 to 25,000 that I can read but doesn't have all the street names on it. And I literally have a tourist map. And I had to cross-reference the grid locations and everything else to do the checkpoints, to plan the route. And so we take off on our first patrol on 4 November 1982. Go to the next slide. And so yeah, this was us looking like the dogs of war right before we took off. I'll tell you an interesting story about that. So that you can see, you mentioned Vietnam. All our recon instructors had been Vietnam, and all our recon instructors had talked about travel light, freeze at night, lightweight. You don't need that helmet. You don't need that flak jacket. And so I had asked my battalion commander, hey, I've never been on a presence mission before. What does one wear? And so we decided that since we weren't really, this wasn't a combat mission, that this is where we'd go.
Yeah.
And so we're looking bad in our soft covers and no flax and H harnesses. Next slide. And this is,
it's never a combat mission till someone shoots at you, and then
so these are like lessons you learn when you're a young officer and realize how stupid you are. But I'd asked my battalion commander, I said, hey, what are we wearing to this thing? And he was a Vietnam, he'd been combat wounded in Vietnam, and he was like, soft covers. And so it's kind of hard to see, but that's us getting ready. We're all lined up there, and you can see we've got a big press presence. And one of the things that was shocking to me after an entire recon career to that point of, we're not supposed to be seen. I've got a press entourage, and they are filming everything we're doing, and they're going to follow us on patrol.
Hey, Jim, 2 things I want to pitch in real quick. Mike Sloan, our classmate, M Company, says hi, and Will Colbert also is. He jumped on this board, and so we'll do a shout out to the great class of '79 and our friends there. And then tell us anything about an interpreter, or you had about 9 languages to work with there. How did that go?
So I was assigned, we were going to be operating in both East and West Beirut. I was assigned 2 Lebanese officers. One was a Maronite Christian, and one was a Shia Muslim, and they would alternate days with us. So they would go through, and it was kind of interesting because I thought, well, okay, if nothing else on the navigation piece, if I get lost, these guys, they were born here, they'll know their way around. And as it turned out, it was kind of interesting. The Sunni guy, I couldn't figure out why he was so nervous. And then I realized he hadn't been in East Beirut since he was a kid because of the Civil War.
Oh, yeah.
And he was highly nervous that he was driving around Christian East Beirut looking decidedly Sunni Muslim.
Yeah.
Or Shia Muslim.
Yeah.
Even though
that's a really great point. How were you set for night operations and nods and stuff like that back then? Because I know
back then so the comms and the nods and all that was essentially non-existent. So we didn't have any night observation. When we went at night, we were just basically driving through downtown with the lights on the Jeep. My comms, the first couple of patrols, we went quote unquote high end. They actually had a radio retrans and a CH-46 flying over the city, so I could hit the retrans no matter where I was in the city. That got boring for the wing, and that stopped. And so I had to go. I ended up having to just be able to find checkpoints where I could check in with VHF, and I carried an HF set with me as a backup, and that was pretty much it. And so we were pretty convinced that if we'd gotten hit, it was going to be a long time before somebody could figure out where we were and how to get us, come get us.
A few more human dimension questions in terms of medical support and medical reaction force, or any QRF. Can you describe and talk us through how that was set up and how that?
Yeah, the medical support, you know, I had my doc, I had my corpsman that was with me. And then the react was one of the companies had a platoon and a couple of deuce and a halves that were going to, you know, bang through the city and try to come get me. But it was, you know, compared to what we were doing today. I mean, when you look at that Jeep today and you think about, you know, the Hummers, then the up armored uppers, then the wraps, and the things that we, you know, and the body armor and all the things that we've had here in the last 20 years. And then you look at that, it's almost embarrassing, and B, it's scary that we kind of were rolling around what was then the most dangerous city in the world looking like that. But
yeah. Hey, let me ask you, just place this in context of the embassy in Tehran, and these missions that started special operations like Desert One, and then lead us to the bombing of the barracks.
Sure. So, I mean, all of this is taking place in the background. So this is 1982. Obviously, in 1979, the embassy had takedown by the Iranians, and then the subsequent 444-day, I think it was, hostage crisis.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, obviously Iran is now not our friend, and they are trying to spread their influence across the region. And I don't think it was appreciated by anybody at the time, the degree, I know I didn't appreciate it, the degree to which the Shia Muslim community there, which was the majority in Lebanon, looked to Iran through Syria, and were taking orders from them that on the and so as we began these patrols, one of the things that subsequently came out in the Long Commission was this idea that these patrols, while we were looking to support the central Lebanese government and looking to try to bolster the Lebanese army, the fact, when I remember in the beginning, I talked about the key positions went to the Christians, that what it really looked like to everybody else was that because the president was Christian, because the Army General Chief of Staff and a lot of the leadership in the Army was Christian, it looked like we were supporting the Christians, and therefore, yes, we must have been against everybody else.
Yeah, great point.
And so these patrols, and then there was a parallel effort that was actually led ultimately by Brigadier General Steiner. He ended up being the Office of Military Cooperation 1-star, running out of the embassy, was running the training mission to the Lebanese army. Those two things in combination made it look like, oh, they're on the side of the Christians, therefore they're not our friends. And that starts down this long slide of, as the various groups got used to our presence and began to go at each other, decide that we were just another faction on the ground participating in their little civil war along with the Israelis and the Syrians and the PLO and everybody else.
We know from some of our lifetime experiences that locations such as this, you know, around the dinner table or around the house, the old gentleman, the sage old wise one said, we have thrown every invader back into that ocean. And it's so much a part of their fiber in Somalia and Djibouti and where you went that unknowingly, innocently, our young military members step off to help and have to make dozens of ethical decisions every given day, of which 99.9% they get right. But there's always that deeper side of it, that cultural side of it that we don't get, or the historical side of it that we didn't get until after we get older and read about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, looking back in retrospective, this looks very much like the opening round of the War on Terror. It's all the things.
I've always said that. I totally believe that. Yeah.
as you and I know, when we were at the Citadel and we first went in the military, it was all fighting the Soviet Union all the time, and this stuff was not on the radar. And yet, for all that training, this is where at least I ended up, and you ended up in Somalia. We ended up in a place we didn't know a lot about, with no cultural understanding and no real understanding of how we interact in this environment. And I think I know certainly from my perspective, looking back, had no idea that these patrols that we thought felt like we were doing important stuff was probably contributing to.
Yeah, that's a great point. Hey, let's shift and focus and discuss a little bit about the bombing and describe to the folks how your turnover to the next unit occurred, and then what you saw in terms of the conditions on the ground as you departed that led to the bombing.
So, let me tell you what, just put one quick story since we got this slide up. Can you go to the next slide just real quick? That's why I just got to tell. So just to show you, just a kind of a quick vignette, this interesting story. So this is the front page of the Washington Post the next day. We're worldwide news. If I'd known a Pulitzer Prize winning photographer was going to take my picture and put it on the front page, I would have dressed differently. Yeah. So anyway, we were famous for like a hot second. Interestingly enough, going back to the uniform discussion, the Commandant of the Marine Corps comes down to get his paper in the morning, looks at that, calls the command center, calls Colonel Stokes directly on the hotline, and says, I don't know who that lieutenant is, but get him in a helmet and flak jacket and lose the sky-mounted machine guns. And so if you flip to the next slide, 2 days later on the Sunday San Diego Union, you can see we got our helmets and flak jackets on. We've lost the machine guns. We're back in business. So
we've always said that one of the differences between the Army and the Marine Corps is that if the Commandant says everyone's wearing a brown T-shirt tomorrow, that's going to happen. And for us, it might take 3 years to get everyone in uniform. That's a true rendition of that story. I love it.
Took one day, and I'm back in a helmet and flak jacket. So that's how we did the rest of the patrols. But back to your point on the bombing. So we rotated out mid-February, February 15th. Next MEU comes in. Immediately things start to begin to deteriorate. Of course, I'm out now. I'm onto my B billet. I'm onto another assignment, but I'm watching, from a distance.
I'll bet.
But what subsequently happens is the next group comes in, and it's starting to become clear in the spring. The Reagan administration is working with the Lebanese government on that peace agreement, and the idea that the Israelis would ultimately withdraw from Lebanon. This starts to kick off a posturing by the various religious militias. And you start to see an uptick in violence. And so in March, there's the bombing of the U.S. Embassy in downtown Beirut. That should have been a warning. That wiped out most of the CIA station there. And as the spring goes on into May, when they finally do conclude this peace agreement with the Israelis, and the Israelis do subsequently indicate that they are going to withdraw, that's when the violence really begins to pick up as the Druze militia, the Phalange militia, the Amal, and all the other groups begin to end up doing firefights in the hills. And then what originally started as just stray rounds onto the airport where the Marines were, and the Marines start going through a transformation from being just taking the rounds to being able to respond in self-defense. This begins to spin up the violence and begins to call into question what the Marines are actually doing there. And so this goes on through the summer of now into 1983. And then ultimately what happens in the summer is that the next MEU, which ends up being BLT 18, rotates in on top of that, and they roll right into what is already a fairly hot environment now in Beirut as the situation starts to deteriorate. The final chapter really starts to go down in August, when the Israelis, pretty much on no notice, decide they're withdrawing. And as they immediately pull out, this kicks off what's called the September War. And the September War is when the militias, now in earnest, start to maneuver for ground in the Shuf Mountains and in the areas in and around Beirut, with this idea that they're going to redraw the lines of who owns what ground as the Israelis kick off. One of the key battles was at a place called Souk El Garb, and I mean, there's a lot of background to this that we probably don't have time to go into. But the bottom line is the Lebanese army goes into is in the 8th Brigade, is trying to prevent the PLA, which is the Druze militia, from taking over Souk El Garb, and asks the U.S. military for support, direct support. Up until this point, there's never been direct support to the Lebanese army. It's always been training, it's always been equipping, it's been self-defense, but it's never been in direct support. Finally, the authorization's given from Washington, the conditions are met. Colonel Garrity, the Mao commander, gives permission. Naval gunfire and air support are used in direct support of the Druze. This now crosses the line. This is no longer a presence mission with the U.S. being neutral. We are now visibly and materially in support of the Lebanese government and the Christian group. Oddly enough, the commander of that brigade was a guy named Brigadier General Aoun. He is the president of Lebanon today. And he was a Christian, running a largely Christian brigade. And we were just seen as being in direct support. And there's a lot of analysts who think this is what sent everybody over the line and caused the Shia militia, the Shia, to start formulating this idea that they could attack the barracks.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there was, or do you know there was, they were backed by what would become Hezbollah, or backed by Syria, or backed by Iran?
So the group that attacked in this particular instance was supposedly a combination of PLO and Syrian fighters, and that's what was one of the triggers for that allowed U.S. support. The rules, they actually didn't ever change the rules of engagement. The policy guidance that was given was we could fire in support of the Lebanese army if they were under attack from quote unquote outside actors. So the fact that they were Syrian and PLO and not another, simply another internal militia was what triggered it. But it certainly this was certainly seen as the crossing the line, and the idea that that we were now just another militia, and we were an open target, no longer a neutral player in this game. And so, the immediate planner, I always have to look at his name because I can never remember it. Imad Fayez Mugania was the planner, and the guy that gave the immediate support was the IRGC commander in the Bekaa Valley, the Iranian Guards guy, Mohammed Najjar. So they've been traced back as the planner and the implementer for what was ultimately the Beirut bomb.
Can you give us a recap on, so 4 days later after the bombing, what did we know, and what had we lost?
Well, interesting. Just to get up to the bombing. So, obviously this is actually kind of a little bit of an emotional picture for me. I don't know why I did this, but on the day I left Beirut, I know the exact date of this picture. It was 15 February, 1983, because I was getting ready to get on the helicopter and leave. And so I just walked through the gate, turned around and took a picture of the building. Wow. That just happens to be the view that the bomber would have had. That's the gate he crashed through. And that dark spot in the middle is the atrium he drove into that blew up the building. And you can see the tire tracks that run back and forth. Yep. in the middle of that. Obviously, largest non-nuclear explosion on record, and as was mentioned in the intro, largest single day loss of life for the Marine Corps since Iwo Jima, and obviously a very emotional event for all of us who were in 2nd Marine Division or deployed out of the 2nd Marine Division at the time, because we knew, quite a number of the folks that were in it. In the aftermath, oddly enough, there was Hezbollah was not a thing. The traffic that they were tracking was a group called Islamic Jihad, which was a new group. I don't think Hezbollah, actually came around or announced itself as a group until '85, but I think it's largely seen that the perpetrators were the nascent group that became Hezbollah.
Yeah. Hey, got a couple minutes left. First of all, let me again do a shout out. We have David Hooper here saying happy to have been in Jim's TBS class. Dallas, he said Dallas, happy to have been in Jim's class. And then Karen.
Oh my God, there's a name I haven't seen in a while.
Which one? David Hoover?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, fantastic. And AJ Gerber, a Marine from Gulf Company 26 as well. Wayne Briggs provided some other context. Thank you, Wayne, with regard to from 58 on, basically the language, to correct my paraphrase. He said he cites in 58, according to a Beirut resident, you come here and you kick our butt, and now your ships will rust in the water. So it is that understanding of where we place. So now, in our final couple of minutes, folks, we're here with Jim Lariviere, Major General, United States Marine Corps, retired, Citadel class of '79, and a great friend of mine, and a warrior, a diplomat, a gentleman, and a brilliant intellect. So now, as we really focus every day on our veterans and all that, what words? First of all, what veteran or otherwise association would you like to shout out?
So I'd like to take a shout out to I'm a former 2-time board member with the Marine Corps Association and Foundation. They do some great works, not only they do great work for the Marine Corps and for the Marines out there, providing, everything from awards to educational opportunities and things. And so I've got a great respect for the association, and any support that anybody wants to give, please send it that way.
That's fantastic. And, I mentioned earlier to our audience that we're a 501c3, the National Veterans Memorial Museum, but we get no federal funds. And so, but when we share and partner with someone, we're happy to support them and the goodness that they bring to America. So the Marine Corps Association and Foundation, go to their website and take care of someone, because I'll bet for sure they're going to take care of a wounded Marine. They're going to take care of a family of survivors. They're going to provide scholarships, or they'll fight on Capitol Hill to take care of future Marines. So I think that's awesome. I like to also shout out Patriot Foundation. I got to speak yesterday with them and on behalf of them as a Board of Advisory member, and they do provide scholarships to families of our severely wounded or Gold Star families. So that's the Patriot Foundation out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Well, Jim, your final thoughts and messages to veterans would be what?
Well, I guess first off, please, again, this is always an emotional time of year for everybody who was a Beirut veteran or anybody who was in and around 2nd Marine Division at the time. Please keep the memory of all those Marines, sailors, and soldiers who died in the Beirut in your thoughts and prayers. It's still a highly emotionally charged event for most of us. And I guess for everybody else, just a general thank you to the veterans of this country for the sacrifices you've made, whether you served in World War II, Korea, or all the way up through the current conflicts, or whether you just served and never made it to a conflict. We appreciate, I and my family and all of us appreciate your service. And thank you again, Mike, for all you're doing for veterans out there across the country.
Yeah, we've got a great team here. And we band together and partner with any men and women of character who like each other and are on some kind of a noble mission. Brian Kavanaugh sends best also to us. Mike Murphy, classmate, and rest in peace, Staff Sergeant Kevin Kuhlman. as well from Mike Murphy. And John Paul Valjoyce sent some messages as well. So I really want to thank you for taking the time. This has been insightful, exciting. My heart is racing and pounding. You know, we want to move to the sounds of guns and help somebody, and you bring the human dimension and the reality of those moments as seen through the eyes of a young officer and as seen through the wisdom of a general officer and great friend. And with that, I'd like to turn back over to Colonel Bill Butler. Jim, is there anything else you want to say before Bill does us a nice closeout?
No, thank you. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate the opportunity, and great job to you and your entire team.
Okay, thanks. I'll see you around.
Good.
All right, sure. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for a great discussion today. It was very informative and helped highlight and commemorate some tremendous Americans who sacrificed all for us. And then on November 11th, it's Veterans Day. We're marking it with a virtual ceremony with great messages from Mr. Bruce Thorne, Army Ranger and veteran, NVMM board member, and the CEO of Big Lots. He'll be joined by Emmy Award-winning talk show host and Marine Corps and Navy veteran Montel Williams. That'll be a virtual event, so please join us if able. That concludes our latest installment of Veteran Voices. Would like to thank our participants as well as those who were able to tune in. Thanks and have a great day.
Thank you. Semper Fi and all the way, Jim.
Wars aren't fought by countries. They're fought by people. Now, hear their stories in their own words. Honor their service in your own way. At the only museum in America that gives a voice to all our veterans. The National Veterans Memorial and Museum. It's more than a museum. It's the new home of the brave.